Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. Sisimulan natin ang programa pagkatapos ng 5 minuto. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll start the program in 5 minutes.
As an organization, it is our mission and vision to give a platform or a space for women artists and writers to publish their work and have their works read. It started in 2015. It was me. I asked who among my friends wanted to organize women's press with me because I had a book. I just finished writing a book then, and I was looking for a women's press to publish it in the Philippines, but I could not find a women's press. So I said, what if I just make my own women's press? So I asked my friends on Facebook, who wants to make a women's press with me? And a lot of friends, women friends, responded. It was half serious actually, but when we started it, the work was intensive agad, and in 2 years we were able to produce an anthology of women's works, and the anthology has works from Filipinas, from all over the Philippines and from abroad. We want to connect audiences and artists, women artists and women writers. We want to provide spaces for them to talk about issues, current issues that affect women, and that so katulad nitong sa Lawanin, hindi kasi masyadong iniisip ang kapakanan ng babae sa isang actually napaka-masculine na pangyayari na katulad ng digmaan. Lagi iniisip na it's a military thing, it's a government thing, it's a political thing, at wala tayong kinalaman dyan bilang mga babae na matagal ng sinanay na manatili sa domestic space, ganyan. Sa quiet space, sa mga space na hindi tayo nagsasalita at hindi natin pinipwestiyon ng mga lalaki. But gusto namin gumawa ng mga lunan, ng mga sityo ng pag-uusap at ng paglalahad, paghahayag ng ating mga sentimiento, karanasan, kaalaman bilang mga babae na malaki ang maya-ambag sa gusto nating pagbabago sa lipunan.
Kung sino kayo na magawa ng atake sa mga bakla, sa sundalo, sa pulis, tigilan nyo na po. Islam did not tell us to kill others. When you kill somebody, it's as if you killed the whole of humanity. That's an Islamic lesson.
This president accountable? Because the people were so scared to come out and voice out. It's even Trillanes is bakit nagtahimik yung Trillanes ngayon? And he used to be one of those noisy ones.
So we're looking at the unique cultural context. It's not just terrorism. Plain and simple. It's not just religion. So please ignore anyone who says it's a war between Christians and Muslims. I think that this film shows how much palay that is. But it's something more complex than that.
We actually want to publish a lot of books by women. Hindi lang yung mga aral na women, yung mga nag-aral na creative writing, mga privileged women na pinag-usapan earlier. But the women who don't really write, as a rule, every day, we want to hear the stories of women farmers, women in communities, women evacuees in this case. Yung mga voices, yun. We want to give voice to the voiceless women. So that's what we want to produce in our next projects, publications, books that feature the works of the voiceless.
Good afternoon, everyone. Isang mapagpala at mapagpalayang hapon sa inyong lahat. Mapalad tayo ngayon sa pagdaraos ng ikalimang talakayan sa serye ng Art Studies 143, Contemporary Art Guest Lecture Series na may temang Art and Artmaking in the Time of COVID-19, kasama si Binibining Faye Cura ng Gantala Press. Ang seryeng ito ay inihanda ng AS 140 sa pangunguna ni Professor Claudette May Catuin at mga estudyante kabilang si Gia Lambaga na ngayon ay nasa technical, Ira Ascanio ang aming coordinator at ang inyong lingkod, Andre Magpantay, na magsisilbing tagapagdaloy ng programa. Ang talakayang ito ay dinaraos natin sa tulong ng Department of Art Studies ng University of the Philippines Diliman at ang Gantala Press na kasama natin ngayon sa programang ito. Pinapaalala po natin sa mga kalahok na manatiling nakamute ang ating mikropono habang hinihikayat namang buksan ang inyong video habang dumadaloy ang programa. Pinababatid rin na ang lecture na ito ay recorded at ang inyong partisipasyon ay kaakibat ng pagbibigay permiso rito. We'd like to remind everyone to please remain on mute while you're encouraged to turn on your video camera. This program is also recorded. Magkakaroon naman tayo ng bukas na talakayan o open forum sa huling bahagi ng programa upang masagot ang inyong mga katanungan. Maaari namang ilagay ang inyong mga tanong sa chat upang maging bahagi ng diskusyon mamaya. Again, there will be an open forum at the end of the program. You may write your questions in the chat box. To introduce our speaker, narito si Binibining Ira Ascanio. I'm sorry, Ira, we can't hear your audio.
Hello?
Yeah, but louder, please. Turn on the
Hello?
turn up the volume, Ira.
Hello? Is it okay now? Hello?
Yeah, okay. There you
Hello?
go.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Ang panauhing tagapagsalita sa sesyong ito ay si Binibining Faye Cura, manunulat, editor at convener ng Gantala Press. Ang Gantala Press na itinatag noong 2015 sa Metro Manila ay isang independent, non-profit at volunteer-run na Filipina Feminist Press at literary collective na nakasentro sa mga kwento ng kababaihan at ang kanilang partisipasyon at pakikipaglaban. Naglilimbag ang Gantala Press ng iba't ibang publikasyon at nagdaraos ng press fairs, diskusyon at workshops para sa kanilang mga advokasya. Naniniwala ang Gantala Press sa potensyal ng Feminist Press bilang aksyong politikal kasama ang mga kababaihang artista at mga samahang kababaihan sa bansa.
Hindi natin papatagalin pa. Binibining Faye Cura, the floor is yours.
Hello. Good afternoon. Pwede ba natin i-share screen yung aking presentation? Yun, no? So, salamat no, sa lahat ng nandito ngayon. Thank you to Ira, Berger, and Andre for facilitating this discussion. Thank you for inviting us to this class. No? What I will be sharing this afternoon is Gantala Press's work during the pandemic, no? So since 2020 hanggang ngayon, and lessons about publishing and creating that we can derive from this. So next slide, please. For us, publishing can be considered a form of organizing. You know? And what is organizing? It refers to coordinating the work or activities of a group. In society, organizing comes with educating and mobilizing communities to achieve social change. So why is it important to identify feminist publishing as a way of organizing? Because as part of a macho, fascist, and feudal society, we want this society to change. Syempre, no? We want a society where each member, including women, can freely and joyfully contribute to the collective sustenance of her community and country. So next slide. Publishing per se has a close relationship with organizing. If we look at history, we'll find that revolutionary movements used pamphlets, newsletters, and newspapers to propagate their ideologies as well as to update the people on the activities of the movement. No? So, for example, the anti-American Sakdalista group in the 1930s published their own newspaper to disseminate their nationalist calls. Ganyan. So, Gleichheit, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, no? But it translates to equality. Yeah. Was the newspaper of the German socialists. It was edited by Clara Zetkin, the mother of International Working Women's Day. Zetkin also wrote on how propaganda can be used to organize women. Dito naman sa kanan, no, it's an old issue of the newsletter of Malayang Kilusan ng Bagong Kababaihan o Makibaka, the militant women's organization founded in 1970 by a poet, in fact, no, named Maria Lorena Barros. So yung larawan naman dito sa baba is Crisanto Evangelista, another poet, no, the founder of the Partido Comunista ng Pilipinas. He was a typesetter who later led a union of printing workers. So next slide. Ayun. So in times of crisis like the pandemic, we want to change many things in society. No? We have seen in previous slides, no, the relationship among publishing, organizing, and mobilizing. So publishing is relevant in these times when we want to achieve social change. No? Tulad ng paulit-ulit kong sinasabi. No? This contradicts the common notion that came up during the early months of the crisis, which says that publishing, books, and art are among the quote-unquote non-essentials. Of course, this can be true if our definition of the essential is only limited to those that we need for mere survival. But if we want to advance the changes that we want to see in order to lead a fuller and more meaningful life, then publishing and art are definitely essential. No? Ayun. So when we were just starting out in 2015, we only wanted to challenge why writing seminars and workshops, books or anthologies and art exhibits, no, concerts, film festivals were dominated by male writers and artists. But in the 6 years that we have been learning and maturing, the changes that we envision have naturally deepened and widened as well. So our consideration of what publishing is and what it can do has also developed. So next, one important change within our collective during the pandemic, was opening the group to volunteers to help us with the increasing work within the press, such as producing books, writing statements, and organizing events. So previously, we only had less than 10 members in the group, and maybe only half of the 10 were active. No? So when planning for this year, we identified the general objectives of Gantala Press, and these objectives have been guiding us in our continued operations in these difficult times. So first objective is to develop and advance the orientation of Gantala as a feminist small press. So this means identifying the political direction that we want to take as a collective. Next is to strengthen solidarity with the basic sectors, particularly farmers, fisherfolk, agricultural workers, indigenous peoples, workers, and the urban poor. So they are the communities that we want or we hope to serve. And 3, to produce feminist publications which are anchored in the interest of the basic sectors. So this refers to our artistic production, our books and our projects. So actually, these 3 objectives are all related and overlapping, as we shall see in the activities and insights that I will be sharing in the next slides. Next, please. This is the first entry in the Publishing Go Manifesto that we wrote in 2019 to guide us in our work, as well as to document our growth as a collective. So yan, we are a Filipina feminist literary collective that seeks to decolonize, reclaim, and own the word feminist. We do this by redefining the term according to the socio-political, cultural, economic needs and conditions of the country today. We study by learning from and alongside women in communities, drawing from the wisdom of Filipino warriors, writers, and artists in history, and seeking interrelationships with the international women's movement. Yan, no? So ano natin yan? Isa-isahin. Feminism is a complicated subject in many countries, including the Philippines. No? And perhaps the resistance even of activists against feminism is a result of capitalism and Western thought's success in co-opting this idea and using it to advance their interests. No, hence, there's liberal feminism, no, the girl boss phenomenon, the Wonder Woman film, no, among many other examples. But if we look at existing scholarship by women, no, such as this book by Kumari Jayawardena, we shall see that feminism exists and is adapted as a revolutionary perspective in colonized and poor countries like ours. No? We shall see that many revolutionary movements understand that women's liberation is closely interlinked with and based upon national emancipation from imperialism and the emancipation of the basic masses. Hindi yan magkakahiwalay. Of course, it is upon us women scholars and researchers of the present generation to build upon previous research. No? So for instance, in Jayawardena's essay on the Philippines in this book, no, she traces the women's movement to the bourgeois-led independence movement and the fight for women's suffrage, or the right of women to vote. No? The significant and in fact determinant contributions of peasant women and women workers in the people's movement are not so much emphasized. So it is upon us to study these contributions and write them down. Of course, the limitations of studies like that of Jayawardena are also based on a lack of available documents. Often, it is only the history of the rich and powerful that is preserved in books and other material culture. So, it is really important to document the everyday life of the majority of our people, no, to serve as primary sources for students of history. So that is what we hope to achieve in trying to reclaim the concept of feminism. So next, please. A concrete example of Gantala Press's efforts in terms of international solidarity work during the pandemic is helping build the Southeast Asia Feminist Action Movement, or CFAM, a network of grassroots feminist organizations in Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. CFAM aims to trace the feminist movements in the region, aside from helping small organizations like Gantala launch their projects. No? Because it's a reality that small groups or any group need money, no, to launch projects. So aside from collective study in the form of online discussions, CFAM has also shared solidarity statements on various issues. It wrote a statement calling for the release of Amanda Echanis, a peasant woman organizer detained in Cagayan, along with her 1-month-old baby. No, she was arrested in December 2. A statement of support for a Malaysian group fighting child sexual abuse, and a statement of solidarity for Myanmar. So we hope to continue with the network this year and invite more grassroots feminist organizations to join us. So if you know of any grassroots organizations that who want to join, no, just let them know. So next, please. We were also able to publish several zines, no, that reached out to the international community of feminists and artists. So here is Mask que la Cara, a coloring book that looks at the function of the mask in feminist movements like those of the Zapatistas in Mexico, the Chilean feminists, our very own Makibaka, no, art collectives like Pussy Riot and Guerrilla Girls, and of ordinary women in the time of COVID-19. No? Kasi there was a study that shows that hindi masyado gusto ng mga lalaki magsuot ng mask lalo na sa sa Amerika. So dito naman sa kanan, no, it's a collection of writings by women in translation published by Tilted Axis Press in the UK. It includes works by women who are not usually found in literary anthologies, like migrant women, indigenous women groups, no, labor leaders, farmers, and Muslim women. So we're very proud of this chapbook, and we hope to publish a local edition dito sa Philippines. Next. One of the things that Gantala Press identified as an important focus of the organization is study or education. No? Thus, we regularly hold educational discussions on women, literature, and culture. Part of our study is launching a podcast where we speak with women from the cultural and political fields. We have so far interviewed the labor leader, Nitz Gonzaga of KMU, no? And Ray Valmores Salinas, spokesperson of Bahaghari, the militant organization of makabayang members of the LGBT sector. Study takes many forms. No? It can be launched in EDs or formal classes, no? Like this, or books, or in participation in rallies and integrations with the basic masses. We believe that careful study will change mindsets and will naturally encourage our members to participate in our work, no? To join protest activities and other efforts to advance revolutionary change. So hindi naman gagawa o kikilos ang kahit ang artist, ng karaniwang artist, hindi naman sila gagawa kung hindi sila naniniwala sa dapat nilang gawin, parang ganun. So next, working on an actual publication project is a form of study in itself. So during the pandemic, we researched and wrote a comics, no, about the Kalinga woman leader, Leticia Bulaat, and the struggle of the Cordillera people against the Chico River Dam in the 1970s to 1980s. No? What is commonly known about the Chico River Dam struggle are the male heroes, like Ama Makliing Dulag. But because of this project, we learned, and we're now very excited to share with the world, that women were an important part of that struggle. They dismantled soldiers' camps, they created human barricades, they refused to leave their land despite the promise of money or a job. The National Power Corporation spearheaded the project with the help of the military, who intimidated and harassed the Kalinga people. An indigenous elderly woman was shot by soldiers, and a rice stalk was placed in her vagina. So we recall with this image what happened recently to the trans man Ebeng Mayor, who, after being raped and slain, had their genitals staked with a piece of wood. So what are the lessons we can learn from the struggle of the Kalinga people? First, or one, is that militarization and violence against women continued. Another is that development aggression continues, no? Where indigenous peoples are driven from their ancestral lands to give way to dams, mines, and plants by multinational corporations. No? Currently, there is a local corporation that wants to build a hydropower project in Kalinga, and it's driving the villages apart, parang ganon, kasi hindi sila magkasundo. Chevron plans to draw geothermal energy from the river. And Chinese corporations are building a massive multi-billion peso irrigation pump in the area as we speak. But another important lesson is that the Cordillera people won the Chico River Dam struggle because of united action. So for the first time in history, the various ili or villages decided to set aside their differences and come together to fight their common enemy. So confronted with the powerful opposition, the World Bank withdrew its funding of the project. So because the struggle continues, it would really be useful to look at history. So if our ancestors won that fight, perhaps this generation can too. So makita niyo dito sa kanan yung parang illustration namin kay Betty Belen, who led the barricade against Chevron. So kinulong siya in 2020. for her opposition to the Chevron project, but she's been released. Yun. Another obvious lesson is that women, as I have mentioned, were part of the struggle in the past and are very much at the forefront of the struggle now. So next, for us, publishing is not just printing books. The work, or quote-unquote practice, of feminist publishing also means being part of collective action. For example, we are part of the Free Amanda Echeni's Network and the Defend Peasant Women campaign, led by the Amihan National Federation of Peasant Women. The Defend Peasant Women campaign calls for the government to stop the red tagging and harassment of peasant women, to immediately release peasant women political prisoners who get sick in prison or die, or have their infant children die because of forced separation. The campaign also calls for justice for peasant leaders who were slain under this administration. Of the 326 farmers, fisherfolk, agricultural workers, and indigenous peoples killed, 42 are women. So in support of the Defend Peasant Women campaign, we're launching a fundraising drive, and yung contribution ng Gantala is to organize a poetry writing workshop, poetry for peasant women and about peasant women. No? So sa July po yun. Last year, Gantala Press, along with Amihan and Rural Women Advocates, published a digital zine entitled Kumusta Kayo? Naratibo ng kababaihang magbubukid ngayong pandemya. So the zine shows how peasant women communities continue to be militarized during the pandemic, how peasant women have lost their incomes because of the lockdown, or peasant families, how they have not received proper subsidy from the government. So we used this zine in a fundraising campaign for peasant women who are among the first to be forgotten and ignored in times of crisis. The situation is no different in this pandemic. At the same time, the zine serves as a written history of the people. When the pandemic is over, the masses will likely be forgotten again. Capitalism will make sure that the new normal is business as usual. The powerful will try to make us believe that everything is okay. Thus, we need a history written by those whom the government tries to silence, a history that we can hold on to when making the powerful accountable for how they have been treating us. So collaborating with other organizations has become more frequent for us during the pandemic. We collaborated with Lila Filipina in producing a storybook about former comfort women, which shows another aspect of militarization. And we hope to publish soon sa Loobin, an anthology of writings and art on or by women political prisoners. So yung nasa cover niyan, painting actually ni Reyna May Nasino, yung namatayan ng anak last year. A large part of the sales of these books will go back to the communities who own the narratives contained in the books. Next, please. We always talk about the community being built in independent publishing, a community of creators and readers. But more than this are the relationships formed in each book that we make. For example, we consider it the highest honor to accept a new set of poems from Camarites Nicart, a woman farmer of Lupang Ramos, a 374-hectare agricultural land in Cavite. She offered us her poems after we published a collection of life narratives of the peasant women of Lupang Ramos in 2019. Writings like this invite us to look again at the value of writing and of making art. Who can make art? Anyone can make art. Whom should art serve? Is it the 1% who own most of our country's resources at the often violent expense of the majority? Or should it be the majority of our population? Silang pangunahing tagapagtaguyod ng ating bansa. Indeed, what is art for in the time of COVID-19? Yung tula niya dito sa kanan ang title, May Sakit ang Mundo. Tapos tungkol yun sa COVID. So for Nanay Tess, Her poetry serves to document the 3 decades-long struggle of her community against developers and the government, which both weaponized the pandemic in continuing to harass peasant areas like Lupang Ramos and Hacienda Yulo. No, yung Hacienda Yulo, yung nagsunog yung mga goons ng mga bahay para paalisin yung mga magsasaka doon para makapagtayo ang Ayala Corporation ng golf course. So a peasant woman's book of poems will be published not to promote Nanay Tess as a genius author, no, as mainstream publishing would perhaps do it, but to contribute to the people's struggle. So unlike bourgeois poets, Nanay Tess writes poetry primarily for her community and not only for herself. Because of course, she also writes for herself. Ayan, so next. Because publishing for us is also organizing and mobilizing, our companions in the production of books are not simply collaborators, but comrades. Everyone who is a comrade in the creation of a book is a comrade in the struggle, in walking the path towards change, no? The revolutionary path. At the end of that path is our vision of an emancipatory and empowering collective life. Dito sa left, no, yan yung mga nanay ng Pandi Bulacan. So they occupied Pandi in 2018. Yung mga empty houses doon ng gobyerno, pinuntahan nila. Tapos doon na sila nakatira ngayon and gumawa sila ng mga community gardens to sustain themselves. And collective yung buhay nila doon. So kung ano yung tinanim mo, yun din yung mapupunta sa'yo kapag nag-distribute na ng ani. So next slide, please. Gantala Press has found many comrades in publishing. There are Amihan and Drua, with whom we study the conditions and welfare of peasant women. There are comrades in Kadamay, no, who connected us with the mothers of the Occupy Pandi movement, no, in 2018. So we're writing a book kasi with them on community gardening with the Pandi Nanays. No. Tapos, there are new friends and acquaintances who we meet in different study sessions, like this class. So if we did not have comrades, perhaps we had long been crushed by grief, despair, and disease during the pandemic. Instead, we are joyfully publishing and joyfully building that new world beckoning to us from the horizon. Ayun, so maraming salamat po. Nasa last slide po yung aming mga social media presence.
Maraming salamat, Binibining Faye Cura, para sa napakasignifikong lecture na talaga namang kailangan natin sa kasalukuyang panahon. Magkakaroon po tayo ng 5 minutong break bago magsimula ang ating open forum. Again, we'll have a 5-minute break before we proceed to the open forum.
Throughout the years, women have played major roles in the Filipino society. From the babaylans of the pre-colonial era, the women of the revolution who fought against colonial rule, up to today's women figures who continue to fight against gender oppression. After all the battles and obstacles women in the Philippines have faced, it is important that we know the roots of how strong our women really are. Before the word feminism ever existed, there was the babaylan. The babaylans served as the female political and socio-economic identity that played a major role in the Philippine pre-colonial societies, otherwise known as barangay or balangay. The babaylans' role in culture, religion, medicine, and other theoretical knowledge were crucial in each barangay. They had the right to own property, obtain divorce, and remarry. Women could either be the chief of the barangay or a priestess. They were in no way below the datu, who was considered the leader of the tribe but instead worked side by side in making decisions and conducting important social activities for the community. The role of the babaylan was not only given to women, but to men as well, who were mostly effeminate or blatantly homosexual. Women's involvement in male-dominated affairs can be traced back to the Spanish colonial rule, to the Philippine-American War, and to the following years. The Spanish friars demonized the babaylan, saying that they practiced witchcraft and were endowed with powers from black magic. With this, the friars were able to take control of women and their bodies through aggressive Christian indoctrination. Although the colonizers suppressed a lot of Filipino culture and practices like that of the babaylan, Filipino women still played major roles in their communities in regards to revolution and liberation of the Filipino people from the colonial rule. Gabriela Silang is best known for being the first female leader of a Filipino movement for the independence from Spain. This is where the present local feminist organization Gabriela patterned its name after. Melchora Aquino, or Tandang Sora, played a big role in the revolution by using her store as a refuge for the sick and wounded. The women of Malolos struggled to disprove that women were destined to stay at home and take care of the children. They demonstrated that women are equal with men when it came to education. The post-colonial years were considered an era of peace and freedom for the Filipinos. After gaining independence from the United States, there seemed little need for women to demand any new reforms. It wasn't until the 1969 elections, known to be one of the dirtiest in the country's history, where things got worse. Women's organizations, alongside students, protested against the corrupt Marcos dictatorship. The assassination of Benigno Ninoy Aquino sparked outrage among many Filipinos overnight. The biggest alliance of women's groups that was crystallized by the Aquino assassination was Gabriela. It was the first attempt in unifying the women's organizations around a feminist agenda. Gabriela had added more specific objectives to the Philippine feminist movement, such as providing a framework or perspective for an analysis of the problems of Filipino women, forwarding women's demands through a 1985 Declaration on Rights and Welfare of Filipino Women, and building an international network of solidarity. At present, the Philippine feminist movement has come a long way, but still has miles to go in terms of gender equality. With the current administration, it has also become harder for the feminist movement to speak up about issues that affect women. The feminist groups and organizations in the Philippines are continuing to resist and repudiate tactics that silence those who fight against gender oppression. It may seem challenging and daunting to speak up because of recent events, but every voice counts in order for us to move forward and achieve a gender-equal society. From the babaylan, to the women of the colonial revolution, to the activists against dictatorship, and to the present-day feminists, there is no doubt that the Philippines has always had strong women. We have history to prove it. We must continue their fight against oppression and towards a more gender-equal society, and to a brighter and more progressive nation.
Bago natin buksan ang ating open forum, magkakaroon tayo ng maikling recap at synthesis mula kay Gia Lambaga.
Hello. So isa-summarize ko lang yung buong talk ni Miss Faye. So the whole talk is basically how publishing is also a means of organizing, and through publishing, pwedeng ma-educate, and it can help mobilize communities to achieve social change. And the role of a feminist publisher, a publishing press like Gantala Press in a macho-fascist society, it can help women freely contribute to society, basically. And the history of publishing and organizing goes a long way back. Many revolutionary movements used pamphlets to organize their members, the comrades. And dito naman sa bansa, when the pandemic hit, publishing has always been seen as very, hindi siya basically an essential. But when you think about it, publishing literature, art, they help us live a fuller life. And this pandemic, Gantala Press has opened itself to volunteers, and it also joined CFAM, or Southeast Asian Feminist Movements, and they regularly hold EDs to further educate the public, and they've recently launched a podcast that features different women speakers. And they've encouraged their members to participate in rallies and EDs, educational discussions, to advance revolutionary change. And they've recently worked on writing a comic about the struggle of the Kalinga people, wherein Miss Faye said that working on a publication is a study itself because of the research they undergo. And she also stated that publishing isn't just, it's not just about printing books, because it's also about being part of collective action, wherein they joined different communities and campaigns such as the Free Amanda Echeni's Network and the Defend Peasant Women campaign. And they've released zines in collaboration with peasant communities, marginalized communities, wherein a large part of the sales go back to the communities. And in these collaborations, now they form relationships with comrades. They're not just collaborators; they're comrades in the struggle for social change. And yeah, they've also partnered with Amihan and Ruwa recently, and they're currently writing a book about community gardening and writings by women political prisoners. So, if I missed anything, please, Miss Faye.
Thank you, Burger. Ngayon ay official na nating binubuksan ang ating open forum. We are now officially opening our open forum. Maaaring ipadala sa chat ang mga katanungan at maaari rin namang magtaas ng kamay gamit ang raise hand button ng Zoom. At mag-unmute para mismong sabihin ang inyong katanungan. Again, you may put your questions on the chat or raise your hand using the Zoom button and unmute. Dahil wala pa tayong katanungan, Binibining Faye Cura, interesado po kaming malaman kung ano yung mga pagbabagong tinaharap ng Gantala Press sa proseso ng paggawa ng art at ngayong lockdown o panahon ng pandemya.
Okay ba yung aking connection or mabagal?
Yes,
okay lang.
May konti kang lag, pero okay lang.
Okay lang.
Oo.
Okay. Tanggalin ko na lang po yung aking video, no? Para bumilis ng konti. Okay. So, siguro, Andre, bago ko sagutin yon, gusto ko lang balikan yung video na unang pinakita kanina, no? Bago tayo magsimula. Tungkol doon sa, ano kasi namin yon, Marawi campaign noong 2017, no? In fact, ngayong linggo ay anniversary ng Marawi siege, no? May 23 kasi yon nailunsad. So nung pumutok yung Marawi siege, naisip namin na baka mas may pwede pa tayong gawin bukod sa maglabas ng mga libro. So ang ginawa namin ay nag-organisa kami ng fundraising campaign at saka education, ano ba tawag dyan? Information campaign tungkol sa Mindanao, sa Marawi, ganyan. Na ano ko lang na, kasi sinabi ko doon sa video, no, na ano ba tawag doon, na we want to give voice to the voiceless. Of course, looking back, that's such an arrogant and lofty thing to say. Kasi hindi naman totoo, no? I mean, tulad ng natutuhan namin ngayon, no, all these years, hindi totoo na mayroong voiceless, no? They have voices. Nagkakataon lang talaga na, hindi sa nagkakataon, kundi ino-oppress or sinusuppress lang talaga ng may kapangyarihan yung voice na to. So, ayun. So, gusto ko lang humingi ng paumanhin doon sa aking maling claim. No, ilang years ago ba yun? 2017. So bata pa ako noon. Ayun, ayun lang. Tapos yun alalahan lang din natin na yun nga, no, yung Marawi siege, nangyari siya 4 years ago. Pero hanggang ngayon, marami pa rin internally displaced person ang hindi makauwi. At lalo silang hindi makauwi dahil sa COVID-19. Ayun. So, to answer naman Andres' question, no, yung mga pagbabago, yung tulad yung isang malaking nasabi ko kanina ay yung pagbubukas namin sa volunteers and sa ibang mga babae na interesadong sumali. Ay malaking pagbabago yun sa aming grupo kasi we used to be a small group, no, tulad ng sinabi ko, pero dahil sa paglaki ng grupo ang dami na tuloy kumbaga learnings din tungkol sa pag-oorganisa, tungkol sa lahat ng aming gawain, no, sa lahat ng aspekto ng gawain ng small press publishing. So everyday marami kaming natututuan. So, yun, and we take it in stride. Syempre, ang gusto namin eventually ay lumaki pa yung grupo, no, at mas marami pang librong mailabas. So, ayun, yung isang, I think, major na pagbabago dun sa amin as a press. Dahil na rin sa paglaki ng grupo, parang napilitan na rin kami na talagang subukang lampasan o igpawan yung individualism, no, yung pagiging makasarili lang na artist ako na gusto ko lang magsulat, gusto ko lang magkaroon ng sariling libro. Hindi na ganoon ang kalakaran kasi part na tayo ng collective action tsaka ng mas malaking grupo, parang ganoon.
Maraming salamat po. We have one question from Jasmine Cruz. How do you make decisions as to what to publish and what organizations to collaborate with? How do
syempre, no, with laging ang oops. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes po.
Okay, sorry. So, yung anong tawag dyan? Ayun, laging ang batayan ay yung limited resources na mayroon kami, no? So, konti lang yung meron kaming pera para pang-publish ng libro. So, given that we have limited resources, saan namin gagastusin or mainam gastusin yung limited resources na yon, no? So, in-identify namin na ang priority talaga namin na ipapublish ay yung mga kwento or mga sulatin ng mga hindi naman talaga nagkakaroon ng pagkakataon na magkaroon ng libro or magsalita, no, or magbahagi ng kanilang kwento. So talagang we're very big on yung kwento ng peasant women, ng women from the basic sectors basically, no? Yun, given that we have limited resources, mas doon na lang namin pipiliin na kumbaga ilaan yung mayroon kami para yun may bahagi din nila yung kanilang mga mahalagang mga kwento at saka naratibo. But of course, we also publish feminist works, no? In fact, isa sa mga malapit namin ilabas ang narratives ng women health workers noong 1980s to 1990s, no? Sila yung mga nakipaglaban para sa RH bill, para sa yung tungkol sa abortion issue, ganyan, kinalaban nila yung Catholic Church. So, yung mga kwento ng mga feminist to na mga middle class women, no? Tapos naglabas din kami ng mga tula ng feminist na lesbian na si Aida F. Santos because we also want to ano bang tawag dyan? Parang to publish literature by women din talaga. Na feminist literature, syempre. No? So, tsaka poetry kasi hindi kami, konting-konti apparently yung mga libro on poetry ng mga babae, no? So gusto namin yung mga tula, poetry, ganyan. Ganoon. And then yung sa pagpili naman ng groups to collaborate with, meron kaming natawag ano bang tawag? Natukoy na namin yung term, no? Ang tawag pala sa development world doon ay principled partnership. So ibig sabihin, hindi kami makikipag-collaborate sa mga land grabber o kaya sa mga yung mga malalaking kapitalista na nagbabansot sa mga maliliit na na mga negosyo, maliliit na tao, yung mga ganoon. So ayun, yun yung aming basically yun yung aming pamantayan.
Napaka-interesting po na despite na limited resources ng Gantala Press ay talaga namang yung prioridad na nabibigyan po ng tsansa ang mga kaya ng mga magsasaka na makapag-publish ng kanilang mga libro. In relation siguro po, we have a question from Roy Ives H. Villadiego. He wants to say hello. For aspiring people who would want to organize a collective that's centered on humanity and art, just like Gantala Press, what advice can you give po given that the times have been very difficult?
Sa tingin ko, dapat alamin din muna why you want to organize a collective, no? What you aim, para yun nga, ulit, no? Who you want to serve, kumbaga. Ayun, mas parang ganoon kasi very difficult siya, no? Very difficult na masustain ng isang grupo. Ang daming differences ng mga bawat member ng isang group. So, at saka marami pang ibang difficulties na makakaharap. So, no? Isa lang dyan yung walang pera na pang-launch ng mga proyekto, yung mga away sa mga mga hindi kasundo sa ideology o sa politika. Marami pang iba, no? Yung takot natin syempre sa anti-terror law ngayon na mahirap maging aktivista kasi ikukulong tayo ng basta-basta ganun na lang, no? So, ibig sabihin, kung malinaw yung vision mo kung bakit gusto mong gumawa ng collective, kung makakayanan mo yung mga hirap na darating. So, hindi mamamatay yung collective, parang ganun. And I think it's very important na hindi lang ikaw, hindi lang mag-isa, no? Kundi meron ka talaga dapat kasama, mga kasama, ganyan. So, yun nga, yung lagi namin ini-emphasize sa Gantala Press, yung collective action and collective production, no? Hindi kami, kumbaga, yung ultimo pagsulat ng statements, as much as possible, collective siya, collectively written, ganyan. Yung mga collective na educational discussions, no? Kasi hindi talaga magagawa mga bagay-bagay na mag-isa. Siguro magagawa, pero kumbaga mas powerful syempre kapag kolektibo, no, yung dinaanan na proseso nung kung ano man yung gagawin, diba, libro man yan o artwork. Ayun, so yan, very important ang mga comrades, yung mga kasama, mga katuwang na katulad mo ng pananaw, katulad mo ng paniniwala, at saka yun, yung kumbaga you can rely on each other kapag nandyan yung mga iba't ibang difficulties na makakaharap. Ganoon. And then, ano pa ba? Yun, mas parang ganoon. From the top of my head, may quote-unquote payo.
Andre, meron pa bang tanong?
Or maybe, kasi I think Jasmine.
Yes.
I think si Jasmine is here. Jasmine, would you like to share kung anong bayo? Kasi Jasmine is a member of Time's Up Ateneo or Dana, no? Baka they can share din kung ano yung kanilang ginagawa sa kanilang collective dahil ngayon difficult, mahirap yung panahon. Sorry, inano ko kayo, Dana and Jasmine.
Dana na lang.
Okay.
Oo.
So, ang payo,
Kaya Dana.
parang organizing in the difficult circumstances. Actually, ang nagpo-push naman sa amin at siguro sa maraming grupo ay necessity kasi kailangan so for context, Times Up works with survivors and advocates fighting sexual violence, and sobrang hirap talaga ng work of yung fighting sexual violence in institutions, impunity in institutions, and maghanap ka talaga ng space to where you can be affirmed, where you can rest from yung gaslighting of the institution and stuff like that. So yung sometimes it's the difficult circumstances that really push you to collective action. Sabi nga ni Faye kanina na parang yun mismo yung nagpo-push sa'yo from the individualistic mindset na to realizing na kailangan yung community. So I think parang kung malinaw na it's yung parang we see the collective action as an answer to our parang yung problems that we face, and we see na yung being in these collectives are meaningful for us. I think yun yung nagsusustain talaga yung connection between what you experience and the kind of world na you want to build, and yung collective action that you are able to do in the community. Ayun lang.
Thank you.
Salamat, Dana.
Perhaps
Andre, dagdagan ko lang din, no, yung actually in-emphasize ko na ito dun sa talk ko kanina, no, yung importance ng pag-aaral. Lagi naming ini-emphasize yung value talaga ng pag-aaral. Syempre in the course of existing as a group, talagang maraming matututuan na bago, no, para mas ma-improve ka ganyan as a collective, etc. Pero siguro advice din talaga yung sa mga tao or sa mga artists, sa mga organizers na talagang maglaan ng panahon at saka lakas para sa pag-aaral. Hindi lang sa larangan mo, no, kung artist ka man, hindi lang art ang aralin mo, kundi yung lipunan din na ginagalawan, yung kasaysayan din natin bilang bansa, yung ganyan. So mahalaga, bukod sa pagbubuo or pagtatangkang bumuo ng sariling collective or grupo, maganda rin kung sumama muna sa mga existing ng grupo, no. Lalo na halimbawa siguro kung if you're politically inclined sa mga mass organizations, no, kasi yan talaga yung mga lumulubog sa mga masa, no, sa mga communities na supposedly gusto nating i-serve, no, with our art or with what we're doing, parang ganon. So yun, mahalaga yung hindi basta-basta, yung parang maraming ring talaga matututuan yung pagiging member ng collective din, ng organization, no, bukod sa pagiging founder ng iba pang org, parang ganon. Like, ang dami kami kasi sa Gantala, no, marami sa members namin ay members din ng ibang mga organizations, no. So, marami kaming natututuan talaga from them, and in fact, malaking influence, yung lagi kong binabanggit kanina na Amihan National Federation of Peasant Women, ang dami nilang tinuturo tungkol sa maybe organizing, tungkol sa pakikipag-usap sa mga tao, no, tungkol sa ang meron silang slogan, di ba, puspusang pakikibaka, simpleng pamumuhay, ganyan. Ang daming mga principles, yung mga people's organizations na ito, na mainam na mai-apply sa kanya-kanya nating mga collectives, lalo na kung mga artist tayo and mga cultural workers. Ayun, syempre, yun, maganda talaga na nakaugat, no, nakaugat sa karanasan ng sambayanan yung ating ginagawa para magtagal yung ating trabaho.
Oo. So, Andre? Andre,
Yes.
kasi wala pa ako nakikitang question sa chat box. So, sisingit lang ako. Ang dami ko actually gustong itanong kay Faye, no? But then, yeah, I'd just like to affirm the need for study. Sa pag-aaral kasi, you don't get static at hindi ka nagiging dogmatic. So, na-strike lang ako ng sinabi mo na napaka-arrogant pala yung giving voice to the voiceless. Kasi bagamat meron kayong mga fundamental principles, pero along the way, nagkakaroon din ng transformation sa inyong pag-iisip, no? Na maybe giving voice to the voiceless is like what? Messianic. And dahil sa pag-aaral nyo, paglubog nyo sa, halimbawa sa mga peasant women, maraming mga pagbabago o paradigm shifts, no, na nangyayari sa atin. So that is also crucial to an organization, I guess, no, that it does not become static and that it is willing to, rethink, no, certain things that might have not been relevant now to the present situation. Anyway, tatlong tanong, Faye, okay lang. Curious kasi ako dun sa Gantala, saan nanggaling yon? Number 2, at ano ibig sabihin ng Gantala? Baka meron din tong kinalaman sa inyong principles, no? Number 2, yung publishing nyo, curious ako, ano ba ito? Backyard production? Nagpiprint kayo sa inyong computer o meron kayong partner na press? And of course, sa zine, iba yung process of production, ano? And third, how do you secure yourselves? Nabanggit mo yung anti-terror law. I'm sure meron kayong ganong mga problema, yung security ninyo. The red tagging, have you been harassed? Or is there a potential for harassment and the red tagging? Ibang-iba kasi ngayon, nung 70s and 80s, no? Yung panahon ko, ibang-ibang red tagging ngayon. Magtaas ka lang ng kamao, red tag ka na. So, are you visible to those people who do not agree with what you're doing? So, maraming tanong yun, Faye. So, pasensya na.
Okay lang po. Yung Gantala, actually, kasi, nung nagsisimula kami, tulad ng nakwento ko na, dun yata sa video, no? Very literary, no? Very literary yung aming pinagmumulan. So kami ay grupo ng mga literary writers, ganyan, na gustong magkaroon ng libro. So actually, yun yung aming pinagmumulan, no? So produkto kami ng writing workshops, ng mga creative writing courses, ganyan. Iba talaga yung mundong, kumbaga, iba yung pagtingin namin sa panitikan nung araw. So ang gusto lang namin nun ay magkaroon ng feminist or ng all-women's press, hindi pa nga feminist all-women's press or women's press pala, na maglalabas ng mga literary works na sinulat namin, parang gano'n. So, yun yung...
Pwedeng may follow-up question. Yung Gantala itself, is it coined? Is it an acronym? Is it an inspiration from somewhere, from a literary source?
Yun nga po. So, dahil, kumbaga, yun yung aming orientation nung time na yon, nag-isip kami ng mga words na related sa women's work. Mas parang gano'n. So actually, Gantala means spool, yung kung saan iniikid yung thread.
Okay.
Thread ng, ang tawag dyan, yung sinulid, ganoon. So, parang siya, meron kaming draw up na list ng mga possible words na related sa women's work nga. So, sewing, weaving, ganyan. Tapos nakita namin yung Gantala. Actually, parang mahirap na siyang palitan ngayon, no? Kasi ang tagal na namin, pero hindi siya kasi common na
It's alright.
Hindi siya common na term.
Tagalog term siya? Tagalog term?
Tagalog term po siya. Tapos may nagkwento na din siya, portmanteau ng higanteng tala. Yun yung Ferris wheel. So parang bumababa daw siya sa bayan tuwing fiesta. So ang ganda-ganda ang ganda-ganda.
Don't change it. Don't change it. It is very unique. And its very uniqueness, nagiging may recall, hindi ba, Andre? Don't you agree?
Yes po.
Oo, tapos yung meaning niya ng spool, meaning ang dami niyang ina-unwind, 'di ba? Daming possibilities. Thank you for that inspiration.
Tapos yung sa production naman po, we work sa bahay lang. Kanya-kanyang gawa sa kanya-kanyang computer. Tapos nakikipag-partner kami sa mga small printers din lang. So meron kaming kapitbahay dito sa Maynila kasi in Makati. So may kapitbahay po kami na printer which is very convenient for us. But recently we've been working a lot with Southern Voices Printing Press, no? Na progressive sila na na printing press sa Quezon City. So nung nagsisimula kami, very purist na gusto namin babae rin yung may-ari ng printing press. Pero ang hirap makahanap ng ganun. So anyway, kung may kilala kayong babaeng printer, no, we'd love to work with them.
Oo. But there are feminists.
Tapos sa ano naman po, ayun. Actually gusto namin na siguro related to dun sa tanong ni Andy kanina, no, na isang pababago na nakwento ko na rin yata doon sa unang interview na balak naming magtayo ng bookstore ng Feminist Press, Feminist Space sa Cubao X with Resback. Pero ayun, dahil nga nagkaroon ng pandemic, naka-suspend lahat ng plans to open that space. So, gagawin sana naming workshop yon. Bukod sa pagbebenta kami ng mga libro namin doon, gagawin sana naming workshop, no, where we can study and learn how to make books, no, yung iba't ibang klase ng mga libro, iba't ibang klase ng zine, printing, yung mga ganon. So, yun, isa sa mga malalaki naming pangarap. And then yung security-wise naman po, yan nga, no, tulad ng nabanggit ko, because we're also members of organizations na may mga ganitong concern din talaga, mas doon kami, kumbaga, natututo ng mga dapat gawin. So, yun, laging, halimbawa, nagpapaturo sa karapatan, no, mga dapat gawin kapag, bigla kang inaresto or what, pipirmahan mo ng hindi tamang pirma yung arrest warrant. Pero apparently hindi na nag-work yan, no? Very violent na kasi yung mga nag-aaresto ngayon. But of course we have to ano bang tawag diyan? Pag-aralan din kailangan din namin pag-aralan yung security issue as it pertains to the press, because the anti-terror law will affect, no, or affects everyone, no, hindi lang mga aktivista, hindi lang organizers, and we're very concerned about that. We're very visible sa Facebook, sa Insta, sa social media, pero wala pa namang nangaharas sa amin, wala pa naman nagre-react. Sa ngayon, parang mas matapang lang kami so far, siguro kasi hindi pa kami nare-red tag or what. And yeah, maybe we should no? Meron kaming balak pala. Kaming balak na kampanya, no, tungkol sa human rights, yun sa crackdown pala na nangyayari, pero hindi pa lang namin kumbaga na-finalize yung plano kasi it's a whole campaign. So, supposedly mahaba siyang kampanya. Yun, hindi pa lang po namin na napapag-usapan talaga within the group.
Yeah. So probably, Andre, there's a question on the chat box, but I would be interested to learn about your future projects. Pero later na, unahin muna natin yung audience.
Okay. We have a question from Dana Aduna. Actually, I think we spoke a while ago. Meron ba kayong program of study as a collective, and how do you decide what to read? Examples sa reading groups or research on?
Yes, we have yung naging structure na ng organization since lumaki na kami is talaga mag-emphasize sa committee, yung mga committee, no. So meron kaming education committee, meron kaming publication committee, and campaigns committee, etc. So yung education committee, sila yung bahala sa pag-draw up ng mga ng program para sa pag-aaral. Of course, nung simula, no, nung nagsisimula pa lang kami, syempre gusto naming mag-focus sa mga halimbawa nagsimula kami sa history ng women's movement. Syempre parang magandang background 'yan sa lahat, yung lalo na yung yung working women, no? Kasi yan yung laging nakakalimutan, no? Laging bourgeois women yung yung kasaysayan nila yung nakukwento. Anyway, so may ganung mga pag-aaral history, no? So we're ang gusto namin mapag-aralan na yung kasaysayan ng women's movement. Tapos yung mga nag-aral kami tungkol sa Talks at the Yenan Forum ni Mau. Syempre, lang yon, parang dapat yata meron kaming teacher talaga na magtuturo ng mga ganoon. Mga works ng mga European revolutionaries, women revolutionaries like Kollontai and Clara Zetkin, mga kabarkada ni Lenin. Tapos how do we choose? Mas committee nagde-decide, pero pwede ring mag-suggest yung mga volunteers or members kung ano yung gusto nilang pag-aralan. So like in fact, last week lang, no, ang pinag-usapan ay isang very controversial issue, no, yung issue ng sex trade and sex work and prostitution, ganun. At magkakaroon kami ng iba pang another session of that topic next week, I think. So, yan. Anyone can suggest naman kung ano yung gustong pag-aralan, tapos i-facilitate or i-organize ng education committee, tapos ayun, pag-aaralan na tsaka pag-uusapan ng mga members ng buong grupo, no? Internal siya na education discussion. Pero ang gusto namin mapag-aralan lagi, women's history, women's literature, and women's art. At saka syempre yung mga political issues that affect women. Dun po sa tanong na future projects. Yun nga po, yung sa loobin, yung works on women political prisoners, no, yung mga tula ni na Reyna Minasino, habol ng tula si Senator Leila de Lima, ganyan. Siya, in partnership siya with Kapatid, Friends and Family of Political Prisoners. Tapos syempre yung pagbebentahan ng libro ay mapupunta sa para sa everyday needs ng women political prisoners.
Okay.
And it's yung libro na yun ay very much related dun sa campaign namin sa amihan na palayain na yung women political prisoners kasi nagkakasakit sila sa loob ng kulungan, no? May isang peasant leader na namatay kailan lang, si Joseph Canlas, kasi nagkaroon siya ng COVID sa loob ng kulungan, ganoon. Yun, marami pang yung mga women political prisoners na matatanda na nagkakasakit lalo sa loob ng kulungan. So, yun talaga yung panawagan. Yun yung panawagan ng amihan at yun na rin yung panawagan ng Gantala, no? And we're using our publications and our projects to put forward those calls. And then yung nabanggit ko po kanina na comics, ilalabas namin yun sa September. Funded siya ng Goethe Institute. And then kasama po namin dito yung we're working with Nina Martinez, no, who's also a product of UP Fine Arts. So kasama dito yung mga comics ng iba pang indigenous women in Latin America and Africa and Asia, ganoon. So and then ano pa ba? Medyo marami po eh. Medyo marami. Basta mga libro. Siguro meron po kami nakaschedule na isang libro per month. Like for June, may lalabas kaming collection of lesbian writings, literary writings. Isa pa yan sa mga medyo wala or kulang tayo sa Philippine literature, no, yung lesbian writings.
Yes.
Parang gano'n. So yun, gusto din namin mag-ambag doon sa na yun. Parang gano'n.
Okay. Doing a wonderful job.
Tapos ilalabas po pala namin sa October na present month po yung kinikwento po namin na collection ng poetry ni Nanay Tess ni Card. No? And it's parang sa aming kinuha, parang it's the first time na may magsasaka na maglalabas ng sarili niyang collection ng tula. At maganda pa na kasi magsasaka siya na babae. No? So kumbaga, to use a favorite term na ginagamit ng mga kasama, parang breakthrough siya doon sa, kumbaga, sa larangan ng pagpapublish ng poetry. And marami rin kami natututuan dito kasi we're not only working with Nanay Tess as an author, ganyan, kundi we're also working with her organization, no? Yung samahan niya ng mga magsasaka. Kumbaga, ang ka-deal namin ay hindi si Nanay Tess, kundi yung kanyang organization. And ayun, marami kaming natututuan talaga about, yun nga, paglampas doon sa yung individual author, yung author with a capital A, yung ganun. So, ayun, very exciting po.
Oo. Siguro sa mga future Art Stud 143, iimbitahan namin si Nanay Tess. Di ba? Would that be all right? Maimbitahan si Nanay Tess? No? I'd be interested. Kasi parang, kung may collection na kayo ng poetry, ibig sabihin, meron siyang discipline sa pagsusulat. Meron siyang schedule. Yung ganon. So, ang sarap malaman ng proseso ng pagtula niya eh.
Professor, maybe I can share po dyan, no? Kasi,
sige, please.
So, yung mga tula niya, sinusulat niya habang nagbebenta siya ng mga gulay. Tapos, sinusulat niya yung mga tula niya doon sa isang notebook. Kung saan nakalista rin yung kanyang mga gulay.
Doon din siya gumagawa ng accounting.
So, ayun. Tapos yung mga oo, ganon. So, ang ganda-ganda. Tapos, parang binibigkas niya yung kanyang mga tula tuwing merong assembly, yung kanilang samahan, no? Tuwing merong Christmas party, gano'n. So, yung tula na nakalubog talaga sa community. No? Hindi siya hiwalay, hindi siya, yun, buhay siya na tula, buhay siya na poetry. At, yun. Ayun po.
Ang galing.
But yes, we can invite po Nanay Tess.
Oo. Galing ni Nanay Tess. Oo. Parang nakakatuwa siya kasi yung definition ng poetry kailangan o ng art, kailangan nag-iisa ka in solitude. Pero siya sa gitna ng trabaho, parang multitasking, pero nakakagawa pa rin siya, 'di ba? Nakita ko ng konti yung pinakita mo kanina sa notebook eh. So I'm just so curious to know and see, no? Ano na yung mga tula na yon. Yeah.
And she also writes about her fellow women, no? Ganda rin noon, parang nagsusulat siya ng tula tungkol sa kanilang woman leader, tungkol sa kanilang mga babae, tungkol sa kanilang abogado, sa kanilang laban.
Okay, sige.
And I think we have one
chat box.
And I think this could be our last question for the session before we end. In your experience, what's the difference between a decision-making process in a collective versus a decision-making process in a hierarchical institution? This is from Jasmine Cruz. And could you share what you've learned about a collective's decision-making process?
Ayun, syempre, no, yung bias namin is towards collective decision-making lagi. Yung ma-share ko about this ay may ko-connect ko doon sa isang something about I forget na the terms, no, pero parang kung collective kasi yung decision making and collective yung production, no, kapag nangyari ang social change or kapag halimbawa nanalo tayo sa laban, lahat ay makikinabang. No? Kasi lahat tayo ay nakipaglaban para doon sa kung ano mang sinusulong natin. Pero kung halimbawa isa lang yung nagdesisyon, no, o isa lang yung nagsabi, nag-set ng mga conditions ganyan ng production or kung ano man, syempre kapag nanalo siya or whatever, siya lang yung makikinabang
siya yung may credit
doon sa produkto ng kanyang desisyon. Ay may credit, tapos siya, parang kumbaga yung interest niya lang yung masusulong. And often nga, no, as we see dito sa gobyernong to, madalas at the expense talaga of the majority.
Right.
Yan. So very important ang collective action. Naman sa loob ng grupo, parang very maswerte, parang maswerte yung Gantala, no? Kasi mga kasama talaga yung mga nandoon. Kumbaga, nagkakaintindihan, no? Nagkakaunawaan. At saka kung magkakaibigan din kasi, so kung merong hindi agree, ganyan, no? Malaya lang na magsasabi ng kanyang opinion ng mga tao or ang isang babae, parang gano'n. So, ayun, parang naswerte yung Gantala in that sense. Wala pa namang major na umalis ng grupo kasi hindi siya pumayag dun sa collective decision or what. And of course, ako naman personally, no, kasi bago lang din talaga sa akin yung malaking grupo, no, yung malaking grupo na kinabibilangan, gano'n. I also parang lead din kasi yung some of the committees, no? So minsan na-overwhelm ako kapag yan sa mga leadership obligations, ganyan. But yan, marami akong natututunan, ganyan. Lalo na yung yung pakikinig talaga sa iba, at saka yung humility lang din na hindi ko alam ang lahat. Ganon. Yes. So, ang ganda na yung mga ganoong learnings ay nag-i-inform, no, or parang pinapayaman niya rin yung sarili kong gawain bilang manunulat, bilang editor, yung ganyan, bilang publisher, no? Yung parang ganun. So, ayun, very maswerte and very happy. If I may share, no, parang I used to work in Ayala Museum, no. In Philippines Heritage Library, I was a curator there of history, ganyan. But I resigned after 11 years. And to focus on Gantala, and I'm very happy lang ako na I think that was the best decision I ever made. Kahit na walang pera, walang sweldo, no, dito. Yun, just to be able to focus on the group and to be able to do what I want to do. To own my time, ganyan, no? And still be able to participate in the general, parang wider struggle, ganyan. Parang it makes me so happy. Parang ganon. So, and I hope na nasi-share yung ganoong joy doon sa mga kasama ko sa grupo.
Ayun, maraming salamat po, Binibining Faye Cura, sa napakahalagang diskusyon. Hangad po namin ang patuloy na pag-inog ng boses ng masang Pilipino, mga taga-nayon, mga magsasaka at kababaihan sa tulong ng Gantala Press para sa darating pang panahon. You can follow Gantala Press on their Facebook page, Gantala Press, and website gantalapress.org, and Instagram, Gantala Press. For the outstanding lecture and great contribution to the Art Studies 140 guest lecture series, we would like to award the Certificate of Appreciation to Faye Cura and Gantala Press. Maaaring bigyan natin sila ng virtual na palakpak. Pinapaalala rin po natin sa lahat na ang recorded lectures ng seryeng ito ay makikita sa official na YouTube channel ng Department of Art Studies UP Diliman na may pangalang Art Studies UP Diliman, at sa website nito das.kal.upd.edu.ph. Pinapaalala rin na magpapadala kami ng feedback form at sertipiko na sa inyong registered email. Again, we would request everyone to fill out this feedback form and you will receive in your email a certificate of participation. At bago tuluyang magtapos ang ating programa, magkakaroon tayo ng picture taking para sa aming dokumentasyon. We'd like to request everyone to please turn on their camera.
Maraming salamat sa lahat.
May itatanong ako sa iyo mamaya, Faye, ha? So stay for a while.
Yan,
Sige po.
pwede pong pa-open camera para po sa picture taking. Ayan. Bibilang po ako ng 3 to 1 at si Burger Limbaga ang mag-screenshot. We just have one. Sige, 3, 2, 1. Isa pa po. 3, 2, 1. Another. 3, 2, 1. At dito nagtatapos ang ating programa. Salamat muli kay Binibining Faye Cura at sa buong Gantala Press, Art Studies UP Diliman, sa aming Professor Dr. Claudette May Datuin at sa lahat ng kalahok. Maraming salamat sa inyong pagdalo. Thank you everyone. Padayon.